Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm taking a look at a couple of Model 94 Winchesters. This Winchester out front here is a Winchester made 1907. This is back when Winchester was owned by Winchester, and these rifles were made in 1895. They started manufacturing smokeless ammunition, the 30 Winchester centerfire, and this is one of those in 3030. Basically, it was a nickel steel proof barrel, and this was kind of a revolutionary cartridge for Winchester, and for the USA, because this is the first time that a sporting rifle was available with smokeless powder. Very effective. Used for a lot of big game. You could kill elk. They killed elk and deer and bear and everything else with these things. They were well made. They lasted a long time. This one's well over 100 years old. Shoots just fine today. I've had this for years myself, and it's worked just great. Now, from that iteration to this iteration, this one is made in Japan. This is made in Maruku, Japan, or Maraku, or however you pronounce it, I'm not sure. And this is a licensed by Olin Company to make Winchester rifles. A lot of changes had happened to Winchester until we get to this rifle. And I'd like to go over a few of those. It won't take a ton of time, but if you're interested in this kind of thing, it might be interesting to hear just exactly what had happened, since Oliver Winchester had come out with the 1894 Winchester in his company. Now, this is a Browning design. John Moses Browning had designed a lot of Winchester rifles for the Winchester Company, and this was one of them. These were made with, solid steel receivers and solid pins, solid steel. Everything was just well made, good, solid walnut stocks, and they were a proven gun. They worked well. This one still works today, still shoots good. And you didn't get a change from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company until the 1930s. And in the 1930s, the Olin Company, who was part of the Western Cartridge Company, had purchased the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and they took ownership, and through the 30s, and then I think in the 1940s sometime, the two companies conglomerated into the Winchester Western Company. And all the way up, there was really no changes to the rifle whatsoever, all the way up to the 1960s. And in 1964, the cost of manufacturing the rifle and the cost that they would probably have to increase at the retail level was probably more. There was corporate greed, and then there was reality. Can we make this rifle affordable and not lose money on it? And this is just how corporations work, believe it or not. Some of it's greed, but some of it's just practicality. I mean, if you can make 1,000 of these Winchester rifles, and if they cost you $150 to make, and you sell them for $159, well, you're bankrupt. It's just the way it works. And as the price of labor went up in the 60s, and as the price of materials went up, they found that they could no longer sell these rifles for $99 or on sale for $119 or whatever it was at the time, that they had to either reduce the cost of manufacturing or they had to increase the price. Now, I don't know how that works. Sometimes you think that people will pay for a better product, but if it's the same product, people have a hard time understanding why they got to pay more for it. So in true corporate fashion, what they had done in 1964 and beyond was they had cheapened up the metal parts in the Model 94. They had what they call maybe a sintered steel. I'm not really sure what the correct name would be, but I have read sintered steel, and the parts were more of like a casting instead of they weren't carving these things out of blocks of steel anymore, and all that really did, it didn't make the weapon really any less safe, but what it did do is the finish on the steel sintered receivers didn't take bluing as well as maybe the pre-64s did. The rifles were still fairly accurate for what they were, and they still went bang, and you could still kill deer with them. And I've shot plenty of post-64 Winchester rifles, and I've never had any issues hitting the target. So, but the one thing it did do is keep the guns, that kept the guns down to a price where the average guy could go into the store in the 1970s. And, that's when I started hunting in the 1970s. And you could buy a post-64 Winchester, or actually a pre-64, for just $100, $125, maybe a used one, maybe even a brand new one if they were on sale. So it kept the cost of manufacturing down and kept the price pretty stable throughout the years. Well, in the 1970s and the 1980s, Olin Company, maybe feeling the pinch, decided that it was time to call it quit, but they kept the rights to the Winchester name, which was a smart move because they still own the rights today. And they had sold the New Haven plant to the employees. And it was no longer the Winchester Repeating Arms, it was the U.S. Repeating Arms. And in 1982, 82, somewhere in there, I think I'm close with my dates, it was an employee-owned, the plant was employee-owned. And they did come up with some good ideas. And the first thing I think they tried to do was come up with this angle eject. And since Winchester was competing with Marlin, which was a great 30-30 rifle, it had the side eject, and it had a place where you could mount a scope. And let's face it, in the 70s and 80s, the price of optics had come down drastically, and everybody was making them. You could buy a Tasco scope for, $59. They weren't the greatest thing, and the tracking wasn't like it is today, but, the advantage was definitely there to have a scope on your rifle, especially if you were hunting deer. And it gave you a little bit more confidence out in the woods, especially in brushy areas or tight and thick areas where you could put a crosshair on something and, take that shot be a little bit more confident. So Winchester decided, well, we're going to come out with an angle eject. And this is an angle eject. This is what they call the 94A, and that means A is for angle. And they put 2 holes here in the top of the receiver and 2 holes here on each side of the receiver for scope mounts. So that, in the old days, what they would do is they would just drill a bunch of holes in the side of your receiver here and put a side mount on there, and your scope would be kind of off kilter, and you'd be looking down this way or whatever. But they knew that was going to be one of the things that they thought would save it. But I don't know exactly what happened. My guess is any time that the employees own their own company, you're going to have issues. It's just the way it works. So they were short-lived, and in 1989, so they had probably purchased it in the early 80s, and in 1989 they just went belly up. I mean, it's just the whole process of trying to figure out who was running what would just have been a nightmare. I mean, I don't know maybe somebody's out there that can comment, but my guess is that, if everybody's an owner, nobody wants to do any work. So that's not going to be very profitable. Anyway, what had happened is Fabrique Nationale, a Belgium-based company, had bought the rights from Olin to produce the Winchester rifle. Now, in the 1980s, they had made some pretty good strides in developing a better, I think, a better rifle for a scope. And when Belgium had taken over the FN group, I think they had gone back to a better steel, and they were going to start to make some more improvements. But of course, the price of the rifle was going to go up, and that's okay. I mean, some guys are willing to pay uh, a premium price for a premium rifle, but not that many, especially when the whole idea of these in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were cheap, and you could buy one, you could carry it out in the woods, you get your deer, you're good. But now here comes, every other company, Remington, the bolt action rifles, Savage, all these things are coming out, all ready for scopes, very accurate rifles, and they're competing now too. And now you have a $200 bolt action rifle or a $300 lever action rifle, and you got to think to yourself, well, what's my better shot, and what would be the best? And I mean, bolt actions really won out. So I think that was part of the issue too in the 80s, and then when FN had taken over, they kind of steered the Winchester rifle back towards this style, where it was the receivers were milled again out of solid steel, and this one is made in Japan under the Olin company. They don't remember, Olin still owns the Winchester name, so they're licensed to build these things. And I think Fabrique Nationale had sent. They already had interest in the Muruku Japanese plant, because that's where a lot of the Browning over and under shotguns were made. And I mean, you say what you want, but the people in those plants they make extremely good guns, and some very beautiful guns. Part of the marketing thing from Winchester, getting back to the beginning, the gun that won the West. This was all kind of a marketing strategy by Oliver Winchester, and he was a master at it, because Samuel Colt said the same thing. The Peacemaker, the gun that won the West. The shotguns, the muzzle loaders, the flintlocks, the lever action, the 1873s, a host of guns together, and the pioneers that went out west actually won the West. It wasn't one gun that won the West. It's not how it worked. But that was a marketing strategy. And I seen with my own eyes the marketing strategy back in play again in the 1980s, in the 1990s, when a host, and all through the years, a host of Winchester collector rifles come on the market. And, was the 1894 to 1994. But the Belgian-made rifles had a crossbolt safety, and the reason that they went to a crossbolt safety, and most of the Americans sneered at it, was they could sell the rifle internationally, and they had to have some kind of safety to sell it internationally. Look, you got to sell rifles to make money. You can't sell, you can't put an assembly line together and make 500 rifles and make money. I mean, you're going to lose money as fast as you dump it into the plant. It doesn't work like that. So in order to make them and sell them internationally, they had to have, for most countries, they had to have this safety. And what they had done, if you look real close, if you look at the original Winchester, you got this half-cock safety, right? So that's kind of how you carried it around. You didn't rest the hammer on the firing pin. You had this half-cock safety. On the new Winchesters, you don't have a half-cock safety anymore. You have a tang safety, and you can push that off, and there's just no way it cuts the bolt off. You can't, it won't work, it won't fire. But also you had a rebounding hammer, and once you take it off safe, you can see how this hammer, when you squeeze the trigger, this hammer will go all the way in and then rebound back. So that is, you're basically carrying it on the half cock anyway. So unless this trigger is pulled, this thing really can't fall forward into the firing pin. That's how that kind of works. Plus, they added another safety that was not as intrusive as Fabrique's crossbolt safety, and people didn't seem to mind these as much. So the other thing, getting back to what I was talking about in the marketing, it seemed to me they made a lot more, or the gun stores were ordering a lot more of the Oliver Winchester commemorative models with the silver plating. And when I looked at the prices, I thought, well, I'm just going to get a regular 94 because I wanted a newer one. And they're surely going to be much cheaper than the commemorative with all the fancy engraving. And it turned out it isn't any cheaper. So I guess when I had talked to the gun salesman or the clerk behind the counter, and you get a lot of this, you always, on YouTube, you always get the guy walks in and, the Bubba walks in and he talks to the guy behind the counter, and the guy behind the counter is laughing at him because he don't know anything about guns, and whatever, okay. But it's not really that way. I mean, unless you're an owner and you don't have a very big gun shop and you've worked your whole life in it, doesn't necessarily mean the clerk behind the counter is going to know more than the guy walking in the door. And in that case, that guy walking in the door was me. And I do nothing but read gun magazines. And, I've collected these guns for, pretty much my whole life. So I kind of know what I'm looking at. And I said to the guy, I said, let me see just the regular 94A back there with no engraving. And they had this thing sitting there, and it was $900. And I think the other one had a picture of Oliver Winchester and whatever in the side. And I really wasn't interested in that. Just wanted a regular blued rifle. Didn't want it to be showy. And when I looked at it, I said, what's my deal here? Why do I gotta pay as much money for this rifle as one of those fancy rifles with all the fancy engraving? He says, well, he said, you're not going to actually shoot the rifle, are you? What? Yeah, I'm going to shoot the rifle. Well, okay. I mean, I understood exactly who I was dealing with there. So these guys just think that you bought these rifles to set them in your wall or whatever and not just stare at them and not shoot them. Well, that doesn't exist for most guys that shoot, for most gun owners that buy a rifle and just hang it on their wall. It's really hard for me to wrap my head around that. So I didn't buy the engraved one. I bought the regular one. I didn't get much of a deal on it. But in my mind, I thought, well, if that's his thinking, I wonder how the company thinks. Is it the same rifle? Do they not really care much about the commemoratives because nobody's going to shoot them? So I bought the regular rifle hoping I'd get a shooter, and I did. The thing shoots great. My experience is that both rifles shoot. My friend has the 1994 model with the crossbolt safety, and that rifle shoots fantastic. He's got a big old tang sight on the back. It's like a vernier tang, and I shot that rifle you're not going to believe it, but I think I hit 7 or 8 full-size rams out at 500 meters, 550 yards with that rifle, and it's just dead nuts on accurate. Just an unbelievable gun. So that was an FN gun. This is a Japanese gun, and they say, well, they don't make them like they used to. Well, I beg to differ, because this rifle is every bit as smooth as a rifle that is over 100 years old, the action has been worked on this thing for just ever. And these guns are all unloaded, and I've checked them all. But, look how smooth this action is. And this thing's 100. You know how many times this thing's probably run the action in the last 100 years. And I bought this rifle brand new, and I mean, it's just butter. I mean, it's just so well made, and all the parts and pieces just mesh so well together that I don't know. I mean, I will compare the two and say that I don't think one's any better than the other. And this is a Japanese model. Now, you can make the claim American, buy American, but there's very little that that I can do on YouTube that you can watch that is American. I mean, let's be realistic here. I mean, there's no cameras. I mean, the computers are all made abroad. It's just the way, it's just the global economy. So, and even if they were made here in America, it'd be hard to say whether you could afford them. And that's another, I mean, this is, right now, I think these are running about $1,100-$1,200 for a new Winchester, if you can find them. And I'm going to question how many guys are interested in buying a lever gun for that kind of money. I just don't know. I've seen them out there $1,700, $1,800 for, you know, the 73 Winchesters. So I'm not 100% sure. But that's my take on it. That's kind of the Winchester run, kind of encapsulated. I'm sure I made many mistakes along the way. I'm sure there's people out there that know way more about this than I do. But from a layman's terms, just looking at the rifles side by side and shooting them, and I've shot hundreds of rounds out of each one of these rifles, just not a whole lot of difference. So, well, I appreciate you tuning in, and I would like if you give us a like and a subscribe. Thanks for watching my video.